Well, good evening. My name is Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And it's good to be back again with you. Now, lately, I've been talking about more focus on things that I don't believe, things that I find silly or irresponsible or distorted or harmful in some of the more traditional kinds of thinking that go on with people who believe in God, believe in Christ. And sometimes a lot of people wonder, well, what's the difference between what I'm saying and a Christian? What's the difference between what I'm saying and an atheist? The difference seems to be sometimes confusing or not clear. So tonight, I'm hoping to talk more about what it is that I actually do believe. First of all, Greg Bray would probably be very happy to hear this. I absolutely believe in the process of science as being a process that possesses the potential to give to us a clearer and a more accurate understanding over time of the various things that we consider, investigate, and understand. It isn't perfect, but it is a method and a process of investigating the things that we can observe and categorize and catalog, organize, etc. So I actually do believe very much in the process of science, and therefore my faith is certainly one that is not in any manner at odds with science in any manner in terms of what science is as a process. Science doesn't speak with just one voice, and it's not as if I'd buy anything that is being stated by someone just because they claim they're a scientist. But I don't have any complaints or faults with the scientific method. In many ways, I also would find that I am very much in favor of a great deal of the kind of scholarship that exists in a variety of other fields as well, some that are not quite as scientific. Some of you may know that, you know, I've studied linguistic anthropology, and in a sense, we can't actually take words out and put them under a microscope and measure them in the exact same way we can say measure the presence of a particular molecular structure in a chemical. It's not exactly the same kind of thing, but we can come up with ways of understanding, ways of defining, ways of dealing with various different phenomenon, various different aspects of what goes on in human behavior, to be able to talk about it in a manner that is intelligent, observable, discussable, and peer reviewable, so that it is also subject to a great deal of attempts to improve our understanding. And so I'm also very much a person who believes in the process of human development in terms of our education as a race of people. The things that we understand and know about ourselves, about the universe, about reality, is constantly growing in a direction that is giving to us better and better information. And so, as a person of faith, I don't have any qualms or any real problems of any sort with that process of the human experiment and our experience with the world and the things that we think we need to know or understand. So, in a sense, I say that because it seems that a lot of people who believe in Jesus, a lot of people who are people who believe in God, are already beginning to be somewhat at odds. They just automatically somewhat at odds with science, and somewhat at odds with secular education. I believe that much of what has been brought to us, that has created some of these schisms and these arguments that go on between Christendom and secularism and Christendom and science and all this, is really just a bunch of ignorant misunderstanding that comes from some of our religious traditions that began at a time when, frankly, we didn't know a lot about science. In fact, there was a time when science wasn't really even an important thing in human experience. I think of when we go back to, say, the early days of when we find some of the earliest stories that we have in the Bible, the culture of that day. What did they know about science? Now, it's true that there were some remarkable people in those days who seemed to be unusually gifted thinkers, people developing mathematical formulas, people discovering. I mean, it was a long time ago. A lot of people don't know this, but it was a long time ago that human beings first discovered that the Earth wasn't flat. A long time ago. In fact, one of the most interesting fallacies is the fact that it used to be taught. I was taught this when I was going to elementary school, that Christopher Columbus couldn't sail, had difficulty sailing to America because there were some people who thought he was going to fall off the end of the Earth. But that's not true. By the time 1492 has come around, Europe is a place that's pretty much convinced that the world is not flat, and had been that way for a very, very long time. So that wasn't the issue, except with some people who just had no access to just the general course of discussion that happens in society. So I have no problem with the secularism of various different insights of studies. But when I go back to that culture that existed in ancient biblical times, we're at a time where the average person, the most common person, didn't know anything about science. In fact, in that day, how did we know if a person was alive? Are they breathing? I'm sure that, there have been a number of people we've discovered were, thought to be dead, but they weren't. They started breathing again, and they revive. And evidently, just the fact that you're not breathing right now doesn't mean you're dead. And so today, in hospitals, one of the things that they do now is they look for neurological activity going on in the brain. As a sign. But even here, this is not the sort of thing where even medical science is claiming that's it. We're prepared to be surprised, but at the same time, we're using definitions of life, definitions of death, or determinations of life and death that are way beyond the scope of the capacity and ability of people in that ancient culture. So, if you were breathing, you were evidently alive. It was also very early on discovered that if you were to be injured in a manner that was causing you to bleed profusely, that it was quickly learned that you're about ready to die. People did not survive a major bleeding wound. And I believe that this is part of the reason why, even in the early biblical culture, there was this notion that the life was in the blood. This is really just an observation. It's not as if, there's some people who actually, as Christians, want to believe that somehow, blood is a very, very important thing, or that it's very significant that we have even the blood of Christ. But I see this as an expression, not as a literal phrase, that comes from a tradition that began at a time when the only way we could discern that human beings were actually alive, or that any animal was alive, was that, well, it seemed to be still in possession of all its blood and its breathing. That even in the days of crucifixion, one of the reasons why they would spear certain people would be to make sure that they were bleeding out, and this would help to speed up the process of dying rather than just simply hanging on a cross. And so, in many ways, your average person, this is how they perceived that life was present. That is why when I read the ancient texts that say the Bible and some of these stories, I understand when they're talking about breath, when they're understanding about blood, when they're talking about blood, that they're really talking about life, the evidence of life being present, and that it's the life they're talking about, not the breath or the blood. It's just that from their standpoint, that which can be observed, that which can be understood, known, and shared as an experience with other people is the recognition that the blood is still there, or the recognition that the blood has been shed, or the fact that a being, an entity, an animal, a person, whatever, is breathing. When we bring this into our present day, where we now know far more about the biological aspects of being a living organism, and we try to overstate this ancient observation as if it is something unique. You know, I think that we're losing sight of the cultural differences. I mean, for example, can you imagine how would the Bible have ever been able to deal with a ridiculous notion such as, you know, that Jesus would have come, say, until we had been able to determine that there was no more neurological activity in his brain? How would they have even ever been able to determine that? You know, they can't. And so, you know, to me, our theology can get lost in the culture that from which our ideas and our notions and our beliefs came from, in a manner that just, in my opinion, gets close to being ridiculous and absurd in terms of what it is we're trying to claim is so or not. So when it comes to what I do believe, I see humankind as being, in some ways, more than adequate, more than capable, but, you know, in the process of growing up and in the process of becoming who we can be, and that in some sense we're going through, as a race, as a species, we're going through a multiple developmental curves, where sometimes things are moving forward in a wonderful way, and sometimes they're not. And the pendulum tends to swing sometimes with certain things. And there's so many axes currently active that it's not as if everything moves forward. I think, you know, for example, we see today a tremendous explosion of technology. This just wasn't the case. I mean, when it took us so long to go from, you know, the age of just working with certain metals we were able to bring out of the earth, to then getting into more complex metal alloys, and then getting involved in far more interesting constructions. Then by the time we get to where we can actually start building machines, harnessing electricity, getting you know, the Industrial Revolution occurring, when we find ourselves able to actually create factories where manufacturing can take place in a large scale by people. You know, this radically alters what we are as human beings, but also presents to us new challenges. And in some ways, we take a step back. As human beings tend to find ways of taking advantage of each other when they can, by establishing the way a society or culture operates, and then certain people who discover how those rules work and whether or not they're in a position to take advantage of it. The next thing you know, we develop methods of oppression and of abuse. And human history is just filled with all the interesting ways we invent to do that. It's strange. It's like every time we develop a new way that's going to alter culture, we now have to reinvent new ways of oppressing people. It's similar to this amazed me. But by strange analogy, maybe even an ugly analogy, but it's interesting to me that as graphic media developed, that for some reason that I think that demonstrates some of our lack of maturity, is that every time we get some new graphic aspect to technology working. It seems that the porn industry is one of the leaders of that new technology. But anyhow, we as human beings, we're going through a variety of different changes. And I think that when we take something such as faith and we try to embed it into the long history of belief in God, and we forget that the older traditions were based upon perspectives of life and of God that existed at a time that was not as sophisticated technologically as we are, not as sophisticated academically as we are, we find ourselves trying to protect ideas that just don't work. Well, that brings us back to what it is I wanted to talk about then. So what is it that I actually do believe? Well, I certainly believe that I'm a human being. I certainly believe that that human beings are unique among all species in a way that is difficult to really even understand. I mean, when we realize that there's just, I don't know, 1 to 2% of our DNA that makes us different from chimpanzees, and yet there's a huge difference between human beings and chimpanzees. There seems to be something going on here, and we don't know what it is. Now, we certainly know that there seems to be. We have no way of really proving or disproving it yet, but we have great reason to question and wonder about what is the intelligence of certain other animals like porpoises. Things like this bring to us interesting questions about what are they as beings? What are they in terms of their sentientness and their self-awareness? And is it possible that think about it. What if they were not only as intelligent as we are? What if they're even more intelligent than we are, but without the kind of appendages that we have? What they're able to do with their intelligence is not the same sort of thing that we can do with our intelligence, with our capacities and abilities, since we have the ability to walk around, the ability to do this. We have opposable thumbs. We can make things. We can reshape things. And we have vocal cords, and we can talk, and we can communicate. So we seem to have a unique advantage for exploiting the environment as an intelligent species, but we don't really know if that intelligence is truly, totally unique to us here on the earth. In fact, I remember one time listening to, I think it was Neil Tyson talking about how, well, there's this difference between us and chimpanzees. Just think, what would it be if there was another species out there in the universe somewhere, and the entire universe is made of stardust? So all of the things that make for life here on Earth are also found throughout the entire universe. And so that it wouldn't be astonishing at all if there were other beings that had evolved elsewhere. And if they did, and they were truly the product of evolution, what's the likelihood that that their DNA might have created some sort of a being that was just as there's only like a 1 to 2 or 3% difference between us and chimpanzees? What if there's a 1 to 2% difference in them from us, even further in that direction away from chimpanzees? How intelligent would these beings be? What sort of capacities and abilities would they have? Maybe the reason we don't know they're out there is they know they should just stay away. Who knows? But they might know better. But anyhow, I do believe that the human being is unique. I also believe that who and what we are spiritually is something that is in some ways beyond the conscious veil. That we are more than simply what we seem to be consciously. It is as if, like an iceberg, where 90% of it exists under the surface. We as human beings are far more than what it is we are conscious of being, what it is we are as bodies. I really do believe that we are spiritual beings. And when it comes to knowing what we are as spiritual beings and understanding how that spirituality works, we're also talking about trying to investigate that which is underneath the surface of the iceberg. Now, we don't happen to have any bath escapes or submarines or some other device with which to actually submerge below the conscious surface of being human to investigate what's actually there. So it is in many ways a mystery, way beyond our ability to understand, articulate, or even be certain about. As a result, this leaves me a person who, although I very much believe that we as human beings are spiritual beings, I don't believe that that comes with a very exact or a very academic statement of exactly how that spirituality operates or works or how it functions. Uh, I don't think that's possible to know. I think it can only be considered, thought about, and explored and allowed to understand the possibility. My wife and I were actually talking earlier about a certain phenomenon that is very difficult to explain, stuff that doesn't seem to be entirely common. There's a fellow who lives in this area named Phil Jordan. And Phil Jordan is in addition to being a minister, he's a psychic. I got to be honest with you. A lot of people I've heard about who claim to be psychics are strike me as being more kooks than anything else. But Phil Jordan, he's one of these guys who's been actually brought in to certain police investigations where they're trying to find the body or trying to find a missing person or trying to solve a situation. And he's one of these psychics that they bring in. And of course, when they bring him in, the people in charge are thinking like, oh, this is crazy. This is stupid. This is ridiculous. And yet, on numerous occasions, he brings to them a sense that ends up solving the case, determining what is going on, and in a way that is just uncanny. How does he do this? I don't know that he knows. He doesn't seem to understand how. It just seems to be that that in him there's this larger window open to this otherness that even he doesn't understand. But my point in mentioning that is that there appears to be far more than meets the eye. As a person who's a theist, a person who believes in God, I believe that that otherness that goes beyond the surface is highly significant. Much in the same way as we have discovered that in the universe, all the mass that we can see isn't really anywhere near all the mass that is. The dark matter that can't be seen, that isn't that is different. We see its effects, we see its gravitational pull, so we know it must be there, but we cannot see it. But we definitely see the physical aspects that are caused by its existence. And in a similar manner, I really think that that as human beings, we find ourselves unable to accurately understand or articulate the fact that we as human beings go far deeper than just being beings who happen to be alive on the planet at this moment in time. And I do believe that this is part of what the spirituality and aspect of our relationship with God is all about. I think that the fact that we exist on a planet, in a universe, is merely, in some ways, just a passing phenomenon. We certainly know enough about the universe to know that it's not going to be here forever. It can't be, and probably, at least in its current condition, hasn't been here forever already. And just exactly how that works or if it's cyclical, we don't really know, and we don't have a lot of ways of figuring that out. But it leaves me at a point where I find myself believing in this otherness. I think that it's most likely that it's things like near-death experiences and people who seem to possess this inexplicable connection that first gave rise to various different theological concepts. But as human beings discover that theological concepts begin to wield power, I think it becomes a very corrupted thing. And as a result, I think that most of the creedal religions, as it were, that come about are really nothing other than human beings' attempt to hop on the power that seems to be present in such mysteries. particularly if you can promise to other people that you have the insight, the understanding, and the divine authority. So I see most religion as being a perversion of a mystery. I would perceive that the early biblical culture was also just that, an early perversion of this otherness and an attempting to understand it. But that it was one that I think that God did work within and through. Nonetheless, I'm not so sure that he doesn't work within and through all sorts of religious concepts and ideas throughout all of the ancient world and various different things. I don't know that necessarily is limited to the Judaic or the Hebraic or the Christian expression of this. Now, I do consider myself a Christian, and so you might find out, well, where does that come in? And we'll get to that in a moment. But what I see is I see ancient man in his assumptions and in his attempt to control and incorporate this into his culture and society, distorting and perverting this otherness that in many ways can become a real source of strength and useful meaning and power in our lives, that it gets distorted and perverted until finally it develops into this huge system that is of very little value in so many ways. And then along comes this person, Jesus Christ. And I really see Christ as being someone who comes through this Hebraic culture, through this Hebraic religion, as a response to it, because it's a great opportunity. But I also see Jesus as someone who came to somehow break loose of all of that and try to become a clear expression of who God is, quite independent of that Hebraic culture. And there's a sense here in which you've perhaps heard me talk about it. I talk about the cult of Yahweh, that I see the Old Testament as this cult of Yahweh attempting in the distortions and in the perversions of a very strong awareness of otherness, that becomes really a controlling cult. And Jesus comes along to kind of break that connection. And unfortunately, after he's left with what can break that connection, he is murdered. And they want to get rid of him because the kinds of things he's teaching, the sorts of things he's doing, and the sort of empowering that he gives to the individual as a person, and not as an individual over other individuals, but as the self-empowering individuality as part of a community of love, is something that's going to bring that distorted perversion system of power and authority down. It's going to bring it down. And the people who are enjoying a great deal of benefit from that, they don't want that torn down. This is why they make sure that they try to get Jesus out of the way. It's why he ends up being murdered. Religion murders Jesus. And I think that all organized religion that seeks to try to codify and put this all together in some way where we believe we have some sort of divine authority to do so would always murder God, no matter how he was to manifest himself at this point in time, if it was found that that could be done, particularly if it was starting to disassemble and destroy the power structures we have that give us the opportunity to abuse each other, to find ways of getting an advantage. Life is hard. I can't blame people for wanting to find advantages, for wanting to discover a within a culture a way of rising to a position of authority and power, so that life is a little easier for you when you're this part on the ladder rather than that part of the ladder. And I can't blame people for finding that attractive. But when we start to try to treat that as if that's something that is divinely appointed instead of the way we human beings have negotiated it, I think we're not being honest with ourselves. And I see Christ as someone who did come to really destroy all of that. And he gave to us sufficient information that we could destroy it. But I really think that in the New Testament, we see this new direction taken, getting distorted and perverted all over again until now we're in the cult of Christianity. And it doesn't, in my opinion, represent who Jesus really was or what his message really was all about or what these teachings were really aimed at. And so although I would call myself a Christian, a person who believes in Jesus, I do see Christianity as being a distorted alteration that doesn't, in my mind, even represent the truth of Christianity. Plus, a lot of the things that are being taught within Christian tradition strike me as being things that, instead of being opinions, are considered to be absolutely essential, required, asserted doctrines. Now, like I said, I think that the otherness that exists here is something that is beyond view, difficult to assess and understand. I don't think it's possible for us to just ignore it and try to not do anything to understand it. And I think it's very helpful and useful to come up with ways of seeking to understand it. But I don't think it's ever helpful or useful to do so in a manner that becomes authoritative. I don't think it can be. And I don't think it needs to be. That isn't the point. I also see the real essence of Christianity as being found in this expression, Christ in you. That there is something of Jesus Christ, and I don't even know what that is. I don't even know how to explain it or how to express it, but that the indwelling of the believer, the indwelling of Christ in the believer, whether even indwelling is the proper word to use. I think that when it comes to this otherness, I don't even know that words that deal with location even make sense. But I do believe that we, in our essence as spiritual beings, are in union with God. And I believe that it is that gives to us the strength to allow that divinity and that spark of our being made in the image of God to find itself emerging and working its way out into who we are as human beings in the realm in which we are conscious of and working with. And that this leads to, I would understand, genuine love, care, empathy, insight, maturity, and recognize the kind of care we need to have for each other, as well as a radical sense of individual responsibility that we need to accept in terms of taking responsibility for what we understand, what we don't understand, taking responsibility for what we choose to do not choose to do, what we choose to believe, what we choose to not believe, who we listen to, who we don't listen to, what we regard, what we don't regard. We need to accept responsibility for these various things because we are, each of us, making these decisions from a standpoint of being somewhat incompetent in doing so. And that's okay. Life can be lived meaningfully and in a manner that moves forward without our necessarily having everything nailed down to the floor. In fact, this may sound a little strange to you. My faith is actually founded on some things that are so flimsy that I can't compel them upon anyone. And I see the beauty and the strength of that in this. It is a humble faith. It is a faith that has no power in it at all. And in that sense, it has this amazing power in it, in that because it cannot be defined so clearly, because it cannot be articulated in a manner that is authoritative, it has nothing that it can do except through humility. It has nothing it can offer except by means of suggestion. It requires the full freedom of anyone else to actually accept it. And there's something in that lack of force, there's something in that lack of power that is counter to the kind of cultural attitude we use to try to construct systems and sociological classes and races and people who are wealthy and people who are not, and people who do this, and that there's something about that otherness that has such little power to it that it becomes a powerful draw towards genuine humility, genuine love, and a genuine unity with our fellow man that is based on absolutely nothing. There's nothing to fight about, nothing to argue about. Now, I'm getting perhaps a little bit philosophical, and maybe in some ways even talking about things that are difficult to follow, but that in a sense here, that doesn't even really matter. There's a sense in which my Christianity, therefore, is an abiding in this presence of God, a God I can't even really define, can't even really say what's going on, don't really feel I need to, but there's this constant abiding in that presence that gives me a sense of assurance that I am lovely, that I am loved, that I can love, that others are also lovely, that they can be loved, and that this brings to me an exploration of spirituality that possesses no authority, no power. It is merely the humble existence of my presence, wherein who I am is no longer an issue, what I can do is no longer an issue, merely that I am and that you are. And that this is what I understand is the essence of a great deal of what is behind Christianity. Viewer comment. I love the viewer comments. How do we know that what I'm feeling is the presence of Christ? People have told me that either I know or I don't. I don't, but I'd like to. How can you know? I don't believe that you can. I don't believe that you need to. I think this is part of the beauty of faith. I think it is radically important that this presence of Christ that you experience could have other explanations. And so therefore, you can only hold to it humbly. You can't compel it upon anybody else. You can simply embrace it by faith. Now, this might strike you as a little strange. I implicitly, wholeheartedly, completely, and fully believe in Jesus Christ. I completely believe that this presence that I experience is God. And I have nothing to offer you in any way to prove that at all. Nothing. My faith is based on claims I can't even make with any sort of authority. But I see the wisdom and the beauty in that, and that it forces each of us to realize the radical independence we must give to each person to abide in God. And the fact that we don't really know what we're doing as we do it. And yet the spiritual directions this can take us in are amazing. And so, my answer would be, when you say, how do I know that what I'm feeling is the presence of Christ? I think that's the kind of thing you don't know, the kind of thing you don't need to know. But I think it is very much the sort of thing you can believe. It's something. And to me, that has been an abiding presence that I have lived with and lived in. For me, Christianity has been what started that way when I was 6 years old, when I first started paying attention to a sense of God's presence. I went into fundamentalism for a while, but I found that it was such a contradiction to that experience that eventually I just had to leave, and I returned to that sort of thing. So, and I'm 61 now, so that's some 50 years of experimenting with what it means to make sense of this presence. And I've actually come down to that. I can't make sense of it. It just is, We have another viewer comment. I like what you're saying, Bob. Our goal shouldn't be to prove God, but to show love. People might be able to deny the existence of God, but they can't deny the existence of my love. That is an awesome statement. And I really think that people become believers in almost anything more because of the people who've reached out and touched their lives in a way that gave them hope. And they just then added on to the creeds as a way of just kind of becoming a part of that group of people who seem to have that which was significant and meaningful to them. And along those lines, I would even say that I think that we see in Jesus that he begins his ministry, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. Jesus begins his ministry as we see according to the New Testament here. By going out and after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he goes out into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, as it is. Now, I certainly don't believe the devil was an actual being, but I see this as a Hebraic personification of the issues and dilemmas that we have going on within us. And in these temptations that Jesus experiences, there are three of them. And the first one is, well, he's been fasting for 40 days and 40 whatever. And he said, well, if you're the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. I mean, it would seem, that God could do that. Maybe human beings can't do that, but God should be able to do that. He's also, challenged to jump down off of the pinnacle of the temple so that the angels of God would come and rescue him and not allow him to dash his foot against a stone. And this would just prove to everybody, what's going on. And he's also given an opportunity to gain all the kingdoms of the world. Now, although there's this temptation to find food when you're hungry, a temptation to splendorously prove that you are indeed sent by God, and there's this great goal that he has to reconcile the world to himself, and he could be given all this. And now, in many ways, I think this is really just symbolic in the way that's been talked about. But to me, I think we often miss the real point here. Each one of those temptations begin with, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones be made. If you are the Son of God, jump down because it is written, blah, blah, blah. If you are the Son of God, the temptations that Jesus was suffering here, that he was going through, was the temptation to achieve meaning and purpose in his life in humdrum things and life's mission by proving he's the Son of God. And Jesus overcame these temptations by recognizing he doesn't have to prove anything. He's not here to prove that he's the Son of God. He's just here to be who he is. And I think that in a similar way, that our spiritual mission is to be ourselves, just be who we are, and not allow who we are to become the issue or the problem. Just be busy becoming yourself. Be busy developing. Be busy encouraging others to become who they are and enabling them as best you can, being a resource of love and help in so many different ways. But also at the same time, this is so strange, this apparent paradox that I become who I am most powerfully by not allowing who I am to even be the issue. There's a sense here in which I see that's what's going on. And so there's a sense here in which you're right. If you were comment here, there's no need to prove who God is or that he is. There's no problem that there are people who don't. People need love, and this is certainly an area of connection. And if you can connect with them in that way, I guarantee you the rest of it doesn't really even matter. If God is busy doing certain things that we cannot articulate, that's his problem. And if he's not going to do it right, there's nothing you and I are going to be able to do about it, and it doesn't matter. There's nothing we need to do about it. There's a sense in which, although I'm an ultimate reconciliationist, there's a sense also in which I don't believe that that the embryonic form of mankind at this point in time is anything other than a birthing stage. Someone said, what if when you die and that light at the end of the tunnel is really just a vagina? You're going to experience reincarnation, which, by the way, my wife showed me something kind of strange here. She showed me that the Chinese government, I haven't had a chance to check this out, but apparently the Chinese government has banned reincarnation without government authority. I don't understand how that works, but I guess that's maybe that's their new method of population control. I don't know. But anyhow, well, this does lead me as a person who very much believes not just in the reality of God or the mission of Christ as it really was, not as it gets defined within the context of Christian theology, but this radical indwelling presence of Christ. as being the real hope, the real change, the real connection, the real fellowship. I am not alone. I am phenomenally and deeply loved in a way I don't even understand, in a way I don't even know how to enjoy in some sense, but that it becomes for me a confidence, a sense, an experience. And I find that the more I experiment with it, the more I think about it, the more it helps me to become a loving person. I'm still in the process of doing that. There's some things I still haven't figured out. There's some things sometimes I would love to be loving in a particular way, but I don't know which is the loving option. It's not as if it's always easy, but I find that the more time I have spent abiding in that presence of a God who loves me, the more it has helped me to become a person who is a far more loving, compassionate person. More comments here. Viewer comment. That's how I prove that reincarnation is true. I just show people my government stamped certificate and license for it. Good for you. By the way, we just have a few minutes here. One of the arguments about reincarnation that I think is kind of odd is if you take a look at population growth, the truth is, do the math, more than half of the people who have ever lived on planet Earth will be alive during your lifetime. Between the day you are born and the day you die, more than 50% of all the human beings who have ever lived will be alive. This means that a certain number of the population would have to be here for the very, very first time because there's just not enough past people to exist. And yet, what if we go back 100 years? A certain percentage of that have to be here for the first time. The truth, when you do the math, there just isn't time or persons available to have existed to allow for reincarnation to actually be a phenomenon. Now, I used to say that therefore it's not possible that reincarnation exists, but then it occurred to me, what if we are reincarnated but in a different solar system? That's possible. Maybe we're in a movable matrix. I don't know, but I'm not counting on reincarnation, but more thinking of resurrection. But anyhow, well, one more viewer comment. You're kooky, pal. Well, thank you. Yeah, I try to be. That's why I'm so unconventional. Now, the sense of the indwelling Christ as my center for my faith is also something that I think I've tried to make it quite clear. I'm not interested in articulating clearly or precisely what that means or how it works. I don't think I need to. I'm talking about something that happens under the iceberg in a place I can't go. As Paul talked about, we see through a glass darkly. This is not something we have a clear insight into. It is not something our sensory perception is attuned to entirely. It is something that tends to be just beyond that linguistic barrier, that intellectual barrier. That is something that merely just is. And I have found in my own life that is more than sufficient. That God is with me and that I don't even know what to make of that. That turns out to be far more sufficient than I ever imagined it could be. And I don't really need from God anything other than that. Anyhow, so there's a little bit of talk about what it is I do believe. And hopefully that might provoke some questions and offer you some answers. Anyhow, thank you for listening. I'm Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor, and I'll see you again later. And coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to have a continuation of Is Church Harmful? So you'll want to stick around for that.